So good morning, everyone. It's great to see all you live, and welcome to those who are watching the recording as well. So we had over 50 people sign up, which is amazing. I think quite a few people I don't know and lots of people I do know as well. So it's great to see all of you this morning. So I thought we'd just start with some introductions if you're able to type in the chat. So if you could perhaps say where you're from, if you're a teacher, a practitioner, a philosopher, or maybe something else, someone else, I don't know. And just briefly, what brought you here today as well, just to give me an idea of everyone's backgrounds. Okay, so we've got Cambridge, curious person, curiosity, quite new yoga teacher, West Midlands, Staffordshire, a yoga teacher, love to hear more about incorporating yoga philosophy into teaching classes, love that. New yoga teacher from London and Athens. Brought me here today, interest in philosophy, teaching 3 years, met me on a mentorship. Great to see you too, Annette. Fairly new teacher from Cambridgeshire. Hey, Natalia. Cambridge, teacher and practitioner. Oh, I don't think we met Christine. I'm also in Cambridge. West Midlands, near Birmingham, new to teaching and also interested in philosophy. Cambridge creative to hear more about yoga and philosophy and how to use it in my day-to-day. Cool, amazing. Amazing, everyone. And then one more little question, if you are able to type as well. What comes to mind when you think of yoga philosophy? You don't have to give me like a paragraph or a page or a book. Just a few words, just to also get an idea of where people are coming from. What comes to mind when you think yoga philosophy? And hey, Jackie, good to have you. The 8 limbs, yamas and niyamas. Hi, Delene. Oh, great to have you. Very excited to have you. The power of our breath and our mind. I love that. The roots of yoga. Is that the book you're talking about? 8 Limbs, Bhagavad Gita. Teachers want to integrate into teaching. Yeah. Yoga Sutras. Okay. So I formulated a few guesses as to what people would say. And I realize as well that some people here are watching the recording might not have much of a background in yoga philosophy, and some people will already be quite attuned if they're teachers. So the idea of yoga as a practice and also a goal. So for those who are perhaps newer to yoga philosophy, yoga is obviously a practice, and in the West, we see it as very physical, as focused on postures, asana, but in the past, it's also a goal. It's also a goal of liberation as well. This idea of oneness, so we might refer to this as the philosophy of like reality, sometimes called metaphysics, what the universe is actually like or reality is actually like. Non-attachment, that's a big one in the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. Specific scriptures such as Yoga Sutra and Bhagavad Gita, those are the main ones we learn in our teacher training as teachers. The Eightfold Path of Yoga, enlightenment, samadhi, moksha, nirvana, the different goals of yoga or similar practices, and the yamas and niyamas, which are ethical principles and observances. And I think many people find those the most applicable, perhaps, to our lives, the most relevant, the yamas and niyamas, because they're more everyday than nirvana, let's say, or perhaps not, or perhaps not. Okay. Non-dualism as well. Dharma. Okay. So I'll introduce myself. So my name is Floss, if you haven't met me before. I've loved movement since I was a child, and I've also had a deep thirst for knowledge since I was a child. They were quite separate for a long time. That was until I discovered yoga, and it seemed to marry the two perfectly. But it was really the experience that yoga gave me, I guess, of oneness at times, or of transformation, of moving through emotions and a particular experience of reality, making me feel overall better. And my first yoga training was in India in traditional Tantra and Hatha yoga in 2019. And here are some photos. Ooh, no, that's the next slide. So since then, I've studied yoga and philosophy in India, Nepal, UK, and online. And I have a diploma and master's in philosophy of religion. I've been teaching yoga over 6 years, and I facilitate yoga, embodied anatomy, and embodied philosophy offerings in Cambridge and online, including the Yoga Teacher Community Club, which some of you have been to. And if you're interested, you can learn more about that on my website as well. So here are some pictures of me in my travels in Nepal and India as well, where I trained in traditional Tantra yoga. I also did a Vipassana meditation. I'm not sure if I'd recommend that. It's pretty intense. And some other things. And when I first started studying yoga, I was really attracted to the philosophy, as I think many people are, these ideas of oneness and transformation. And for me, learning and the quest for knowledge had always had a depth to it. So learning had always had a depth to it anyway. And yoga gave it this new spiritual depth. And it was about living. And it allowed me to connect to my body, but in pursuit of these higher goals. Yet while I connected to the philosophy I was learning about, there was also a disconnection. And I quickly found and discovered that it actually felt quite ungrounded from my own life. And I also think I was, quite naive as well, learning about these really like high concepts and actually forgetting about everyday life. And that led to great feelings of disintegration for me, confusion. And when I talk to other yoga teachers and practitioners, I often get similar responses about a sense of disconnection. So if you guys have any, you're welcome to put them in the chat. I'd be curious to hear. Some of them are, it's dry and doesn't seem relevant to my life. Some people just are not interested or aren't yet interested, don't feel like it's relevant to them. I don't relate to it much. It doesn't inspire my teaching. Or on the other hand, I am interested in it, but I don't know how to bring it into my classes, and maybe students won't like it. Or I want to learn more, but I don't know where to start. So if this is relevant to anyone, or if anyone has any others, do share. I'd be super curious. And I'll just wait a quick moment in case anyone has anything to share. Just need to stay on the time. The third one for me, I'm interested in it, but worried my students might not like it. Yeah, I think that's quite common. And I think sometimes as teachers, you start talking about philosophy and then you're like, oh no, they don't like that. That's not what they want. 3 and 4. It is interesting, and I do try to bring it into class. Sometimes it is easier than other times. Option 3. Awesome. I'm assuming you guys are all interested, seeing as you're here. That's good. Okay. So for me, My sense of disconnection stemmed from a tension between the spiritual and mundane as it existed in my modern life. So, for example, I had questions like, how can I live in oneness all the time? Or how can I seek oneness all the time when my life is pervaded by separation between myself and others? There's, you know, a practical separation in the world between me and the people I'm around. It helps us live. Or how can I seek this kind of liberation when it's actually described as a kind of death? And I'm quite happy living my life in many ways. And my life really, you know, my values are about this world. But these texts talk about a liberation which rejects this world often. And similarly, what if I'm quite attached to the world and don't want to renounce it? A lot of the texts talk about renouncing the world. Now, if you have studied yoga, you might also say, oh, but there's, you know, ways to tackle that, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita. And that is true to an extent. But also, there are real differences between our lives and the lives of the people for whom these texts were sometimes they originally arose. And these scriptures, these ideas, were developed in contexts which are very different to our own. And they were a response to their specific cultural and historical situations as well. One of them is, you know, suffering. And some scholars would argue there was immense suffering at that period in history, which led to, actually, I've got the book right here, if you can see that, The Great Transformation. But that Buddhism, Jainism, and actually Judaism and other religions arose in this time, which all shared this emphasis on compassion and suffering. So this is not to say that these texts and ideas are not filled with great pearls of wisdom. We can find great meaning in them. That is really, really true. But for true integration into our lives, into our practice, into our teaching, we may need a different approach. Because the truth is that ancient yoga, so this is scripture of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and modern yoga, which many of us are accustomed to, are very different. And depending on how much you do know about the evolution of yoga, the poses on the right, most scholars would say that, you know, the majority of them are 100 years old, whereas the text of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra dates from around 200 CE, you know, so that's almost 2,000 years difference. And a huge difference in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, asana, physical posture, is mentioned in one sutra primarily. And none of the postures are mentioned. And we're pretty sure they didn't look anything like this. They were really seated postures focused on meditation. So yoga has changed a lot, to the extent that some argue we should not even call modern yoga yoga at all. I don't necessarily think that's true, but that is debatable. And it is very common for yogis to seek authentic yoga and assume this is found in the distant past. So, you know, in modern times, yoga can feel very inauthentic, and we know it has deeper meaning for us, and we want to find that in the philosophy, perhaps. And we often assume that we have to really go back to the original form of yoga to find that. But the truth is that there is no one original form of yoga, and that this change that has happened over time is not necessarily bad, because change is part of our human cultural existence. So the truth is that yoga has changed over 2,500 years plus and continues to do so. And yoga 100, 1,000, 2,000 years ago all look different, and that is okay. And yes, we might say there is continuity. There's this ineffable essence of yoga, perhaps, in that these practices of meditation, of connection, of breath work, they allow us to transform ourselves. But this has also been understood and practiced over time. So either way, the truth is that the yogic texts and concepts we study and refer to as yoga philosophy are very old and come from a time when yoga and life looked very different to the way they do now. And this can create a tension between past and present. So I'm curious, for those who are teachers or practitioners, do you, and you're interested in yoga philosophy, do you ever feel this tension between past and present, between integrating it between your modern life practice teaching and that kind of the spiritual riches or philosophical riches that you want or are interested in? Do you find a tension between the two? Definitely. Oh, I feel a bit embarrassed to bring philosophy into classes as it feels quite personal and I don't want to force ideas on people. That is so completely relate to that, and I think that's really common. Yes, mainly because of the fast pace of the modern world and digital distractions. Agree with the above. I'm really glad, because I was slightly worried you guys were going to say, no, not at all. And I was like, is this just a me problem? But I'm glad it's not. Okie dokie. And this is completely normal, I think, because there is often an assumption that the truth is in the past in a perfect and pristine way, but we need to be realistic, and there has been change. And the fact that there can feel this disjunction between modern Western culture and yogic philosophy and values is valid and not necessarily a bad thing. Yes, I remember reading one of the texts during the yoga teacher training and thinking it didn't seem that relevant to life now. Yeah, loads of people have said that to me as well. I mean, I'll say something really interesting. My yoga teacher training did not come across history at all. And I think you can put in the chat if you studied the history and the philosophy if you're a yoga teacher. But mine was just the philosophy. And so that left me in this even more kind of state of amnesia, because I had no understanding of the evolution at the time. Obviously, I've studied it since. And so I was trying to apply these concepts, and no one really told me, actually, it's okay that this isn't making complete sense to you, because, it was a long time ago, and things have changed, and we have to recognize that. Okay. So what does this mean for yoga and yoga philosophy today? Or perhaps we might ask, is yoga philosophy, these concepts and ideas we're talking about, moksha, liberation, the ideas found in the texts, or is it actually something else? So that really brings us to the question of this webinar. What is yoga? And I put brackets yoga philosophy, because there's a broader question of what is philosophy. And how do we bring it into our yoga practice, teaching, and overall life? So, according to Pierre Hadot, since ancient times, there existed exercise by means of which philosophers have tried to transform their perception of the world. Now, I hope my internet's okay. Please let me know if it flags out, everyone. So, just an intellectual practice, but it went hand in hand with spiritual exercises, spiritual practice, embodied practice, contemplative practice. And really, yoga echoes that. Yoga is primarily a practice according to the texts, and it's about transforming our perception of the world. We might also argue, well, I would argue it is a philosophy as well, but a lot of the texts emphasize the practice. And actually, early explorers in India did describe the naked philosophers as in the early yogis they encountered. That was Alexander the Great. So also, according to Pierre Hadot, philosophy in the Hellenistic Okay, I'm back. Thanks, everyone. The internet. Okay. So I don't exactly know where we got up to. But let's just say here's as well. Oh, thank you. Let's see, put in the chat. Oh, I'm back. Start second quote. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all. So, since okay. So, since ancient times, there existed by exercises. We got that one. Philosophy in the Hellenistic and Greek period took on the form of a way of life, an art of being, and just trying to do it so I can see at the same time. Sorry, guys. Okay. And a way of being. So in modern Western times, we often think of philosophy as dry. Oh, I'm not showing my screen, am I? Am I showing my screen? Sorry, guys. That kind of threw me off. There we go. Thank you. Okay. There we go. So philosophy in the Hellenistic and Greek period took on the form of a way of life, an art of living, and a way of being. Modern Western times, we often think of philosophy as dry, abstract, head-heavy, intellectual, dominated by white men in professional university contexts. On the other hand, when we seek meaning today, you know, a lot of the time there are ungrounded, fluffy spiritualities which seem inauthentic, or there's a huge rise in society of fundamentalist religions and people, you know, nationalism and stuff like that. So people wanting something to believe in, but it may be, you know, not maybe being focused on us and them as opposed to actual inquiry and connection and love. So, as Pierre Hadot argues, in ancient and pre-modern times, philosophy was actually a way of life, one which incorporated both spiritual practice and philosophical theory in the pursuit of transformation and living a better life. So here, practice and theory actually went hand in hand, and the aim was not to know in your head, but to be, to live better and wiser. And we see this in the etymology, which is the structure of the word or the root of the word of philosophy, which comes from philo, lover, and wisdom, sophi, which means the philosopher is a lover of, of wisdom. So philosophy here in ancient and pre-modern times is actually about living. living in greater wisdom. It's not just about knowing, but a knowing which transforms our being. And if you've studied yoga, you might recognize an echo of the Jnana Marga there, the path of wisdom, where knowledge transforms us, knowledge liberates us. So perhaps part of the attraction of yoga philosophy specifically for us is that it is clearly practical too. It is about life and it's about transforming ourselves. And many of us have empirical experience of change through our yoga practice. As we begin to relax and soften, our experience changes, the way we feel and are changes. We can connect to more positive emotion, to love, to connection, to people in the world around us. And that can echo these or reflect the ideas that we learn about too, that there are deeper ideas about reality in the world underpinning it. Yet, as we have seen, it is often hard to see how the content of yoga philosophy is really relevant to our modern lives. And there can seem a great juxtaposition or disconnection between ancient texts and modern yoga practice and life. But for Pierre Hadot, philosophy as a way of life is not passive. That is, we don't when we approach yoga philosophy today. We learn about these concepts, we pick them out of the texts, and then we try to apply them to our lives without contextualizing them, without inquiring into them. I mean, we might a little bit, without question or interrogation. And I'll just add a little caveat there. It's really important to remember that in ancient times, these texts, like we have them as texts now, they weren't traditionally in the form of texts. They were most often orally transmitted in a group of people. They were memorized, and it was very much like a community of practitioners. It was a culture of practitioners. And they would also have commentaries, you know, and that would be like deciphered or explained by a teacher. So it wouldn't just be the text that we generally look at today. So Pierre would reject this approach of just cherry picking concepts out of ancient texts and trying to apply them to our lives. For him, philosophy is a way of life because it is practiced. It is something we actively do and participate in a specific context, i.e. a context of seekers or a community. In this way, philosophy goes hand in hand with practice. It's two sides of the same coin. And it's also important to note this means that philosophy exists in time and place. It's contextual, and it exists, as I said, in a community of seekers. And that looks different over time and space in terms of religion and culture. And I'll just add, for example, in ancient Greece, there was an emphasis on the academy for Plato, whereas in early yoga and the Upanishads, which are the earliest texts of yoga, there was an emphasis on sitting around the teacher, right? And the guru and the disciples. So there's a slight difference there. And philosophy is not about reaching abstract intellectual truths or final answers, as sometimes it is in Western philosophy, in academic philosophy, but it's about seeking the good and transforming oneself in line with it. And crucially, even if we do like arrive at or if one would arrive at an experience of enlightenment, ultimately that experience is beyond words and therefore is beyond philosophy as a kind of intellectual or practice of reason or thinking or contemplation. It's beyond that. So really the words, the theory, they're a path to help us explore and inquire and get there. But at the end, there is silence, there is the ineffable. And that links to the below, that philosophy is also about accepting what we don't know, that we don't know everything and that we won't know everything, and that we leave space for the silence, the ineffable, that which is beyond ourselves. And that's kind of where the beauty is of yoga as well. I mean, if you're a yoga teacher, you'll often know that the most powerful thing you can do is to stop talking, is to actually leave the space for that contemplation. Language takes you there, but it doesn't take you all the way. So, what does this idea of philosophy as a way of life mean for yoga philosophy? As noted earlier, yoga has changed and continues to change. And we live in what has been described as a post-lineage age of yoga. Now, if you've heard of post-lineage, put yes in the chat, or if you haven't, put no, if you have a keyboard accessible. I'm just curious to hear if you've heard of this notion of post-lineage yoga. No. Oh, I'm glad I asked, because I would assume that I just assumed that people might know, but that's great. Am I recording? Yes, it automatically records it, I believe. Yeah, that's good. Okay. I now want to double check I'm recording. I am recording. Oops. So what is post-lineage yoga? Firstly, I'll just mention, what is lineage yoga? Well, a lineage is a tradition of where knowledge and practices are transmitted. And early yoga was within lineages, as I said, an emphasis on the guru-disciple relationship. And there were specifically lineages or schools of thought. Now, in early modern yoga, we get lineages as well. So think Ashtanga is a lineage, Iyengar is a lineage. You could even say Jivamukti is a lineage. They're forms or schools of thought around yoga, which have specific structures, specific teachers, and specific kind of modes of hierarchy. Now, post-lineage yoga, which I believe most vinyasa yoga, modern vinyasa yoga is, challenges traditional structures of authority and hierarchy. And yeah, on the extreme end, that might mean that for many vinyasa teachers, you feel there's no structure to support you. There's no kind of structure of teachers, and whereas if you were working in a school as a teacher, there would be a lot more structure and guidance. Post-lineage, sometimes we lack guidance. It also exists in the context of the Me Too movement. So a lot of guru disciple relationships and structures have been challenged. A lot of gurus have been discovered to be, sexual predators, and there's quite a lot of stuff out there about that. And there's also now an emphasis on discovering authenticity through one's own journey, as opposed to via external authority. So in extreme cases, or more like cults, perhaps, as they're sometimes described, there would be, just listen to the authority, or even in other schools of yoga, perhaps just listen to the authority. They're always right. They know everything. Today, there's more of an emphasis on our own discovery. And you can even see this through hands-on assists, just as an example. In the past, they were given, and now there's much more emphasis on students giving consent, and also the teacher not actually always knowing what's best for the student, but the student discovering what's best for themselves. There is this idea that the best guru or the highest guru is within, which is a bit of an older idea as well. So, what does post-lineage yoga mean for yoga philosophy today? Well, it means that to explore yoga philosophy and to practice it as a way of life, we must understand and reflect on yoga's evolution and history. And the history of philosophy and philosophy itself are not so distinct. So the philosophical concepts and ideas we find in yoga texts can be useful looking glasses through which to explore ourselves and meditate upon. As I said, the concepts, the words, they are not the truth, but they help us to move towards the truth as an experience or as a pursuit, but they are not themselves the truth. But we also need more broadly to explore yoga's past, to reflect on yoga today, to reflect on our practice as teachers, as practitioners, but also our lives, our values, and our goals. Living philosophy and not just learning about it. So I said this before, the philosophy of history and philosophy are not fully distinct. And so I maybe want to add something here, that this post-lineage age calls for us to be empowered in our learning, that it's not about grasping knowledge, as it says here. It's not about thinking we know everything or we want to know everything, to control it, to own it. Rather, it's about being empowered in exploring change and actually holding a sense of even non-attachment, to use a yogic terminology, recognizing that times have changed and realizing that we can explore these ideas, but that they might not be completely applicable to our lives, that actually our values might differ from them, that we have to do that inquiry in ourselves. So it's about reflection, empowerment in our own journey, and inquiry to do the work ourselves, to find more depth, meaning, and beauty in our lives. Because the path of learning and knowledge itself, is one of discovery, of connection to more than ourselves. And crucially, this is not something we do alone. So, according to Pierre Hadot, ancient philosophy required a common effort, a community of research, mutual assistance, and spiritual support. And we see this also with early yoga. As I said before, the Upanishads, Upanishad, like the etymology, the root of the word means sitting under, because the students would sit under the feet of the disciple, or around, of the guru, around the guru. And similarly, in ancient Greece, there were these philosophical academies, institutions, and people would talk, debate, inquire in the city, in the polis. So modern yoga can feel very individualistic. And if you feel that, you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. We go to yoga classes, we sit or practice on our individual mat, and we leave, and often without much discussion between students and teacher. And even the goal of liberation, so if yoga in the texts, it's often about liberation, about enlightenment, that can map onto modern life in a hyper-individualistic way. And you see this a lot with, if you've heard of spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is when people essentially use spiritual language, philosophy, concepts, and maybe have convinced themselves that they are achieving those, or they are very amazing at being spiritual, and they end up actually bypassing a lot of their own trauma or behaviors. And so, you can often see this in a caricature, perhaps, of this spiritual person, being enlightened, but actually it can be quite egotistical. And so this reminds us that actually that's kind of a flawed understanding, and that really these goals historically have been pursued in community, that it hasn't been about doing it on one's own. Even if you are seeking enlightenment, you have a teacher, you exist within a lineage which supports you, and a tradition. It's not just doing it alone. So if philosophy is about living in greater wisdom, in modern times, we must recognize that the history of philosophy and philosophy are not separate. And the only way we can find integration in our lives is actually through inquiry, through doing the work, through exploring, through philosophy as a way of life, a practice. The inquiry that goes hand in hand with the physical practice. Even more so if we're teachers as well, I would say. You know, when you're sharing the practice as well. So there's just something in the chat I'm going to look at. I have felt a sense of separation on the mat and have tried varying degrees to bring people together. I think it is a reflection of the Western education system and being taught to see ourselves as separate, but also taking in information and regurgitating instead of self-reflection and inquiry. Yes. Who said that? Natalia, yes. Yeah, me too. I've tried, and I'm continuing to do that. I think the various things I'm doing now in my teaching and business is trying to challenge this kind of very individualistic approach to yoga. And I'll just add that philosophy is also the branches of philosophy, and one branch of philosophy is pedagogy, and pedagogy is theories or philosophies of teaching and what it actually means to teach and learn and where that takes place, how we do it. And post-lineage yoga also is creating space for new pedagogies, new approaches to teaching yoga, sharing yoga, and inquiring. And that is a great possibility in a positive sense as well. So to practice philosophy as a way of life means exploring the traditions of yoga, acknowledging they often developed in a different context to our own now. And when we explore them, we can use them for tools as reflection, meditation, perhaps bringing them into our classes, perhaps focusing on asking questions and then introducing these concepts, but also acknowledging the vastly different contexts that these ideas and texts emerged. And that is a path for living in wisdom. If philosophy is if a philosopher is the lover of wisdom, then to live wisely, we must recognize the past and live in the present. So philosophy as a way of life, it means integration, it means reflection, inquiry, and it means community. Okay. So I'm going to share some conclusions and questions in a second, but before I did, I wanted to make a little exciting announcement, which is if people are interested in these themes and topics, the history and philosophy of yoga, I'm actually running a new course, which is going to start in June, on June the 12th. And so this is a 12-week online course in practical philosophy, an introduction to the history and philosophy of yoga. And it's about understanding yoga's roots without the fluff, the history of yoga and philosophy of yoga with both head and heart, and active inquiry in a way that's relevant to our lives for both teachers and practitioners. And this course is all about bridging theory and practice, body and mind, active inquiry and community, discussion, reflection, and the joys of learning, becoming clearer on yoga's past in order to feel more empowered and authentic in the present, whether you're a teacher or student of yoga. And just a bit of the structure of the course: 6 pre-recorded lectures, 6 live Zoom calls, group WhatsApp, and also optional additional one-on-one sessions as well. And perfect for you if you want a community of seekers and inquirers. So fed up of doing it alone and actually want to deepen your connection to the history, the philosophy of yoga with others, while also bringing in personal experience in the live Zoom sessions as we reflect. It's going to be something academically grounded while viewing philosophy, as has been discussed in this webinar, as a practice that helps us live better lives and get clearer on our values and what's important to us. So that reflection on our own lived experience. And obviously, if you want to learn more about yoga's schools of thought and development over time, then this is the course for you. So we start on June 17th, 12 weeks with lives every other week on a Tuesday. And you can join the course as a standalone or with 2 mentoring sessions, which is perfect for yoga teachers or dedicated practitioners wanting to find more integration, personalized support into their teaching or personal practice. So there's limited places. Early bird ends June 10th, and I'll send you guys more information. So if you're interested, you can check out the webpage for that. And I'm very excited to be hosting it. And yeah, if you have any questions, just feel free to get in touch about that. So I wanted to end before questions with just some interesting things about the philosophy and history of yoga in relation to modern life. And because especially at the beginning, some of you said your teachers wanting to integrate into your teaching yoga philosophy. And I just thought I'd also share how studying yoga philosophy and history has helped me, how I've integrated it into my practice. So one interesting thing about the history and philosophy of yoga is the ashramas. Has anyone heard of the ashramas? You can put in the group chat. Thanks, Hannah. No. See, I love asking the questions because obviously interactive stuff is good, but it actually, yeah, makes it, that's interesting. You guys haven't heard of it. Let me tell you. So the ashramas are the different goals for different stages. Well, they're the different life stages. And you have the student, the householder, the renunciate, and then the forest dweller. Now, very interestingly, and so these developed in the Manu Smriti text, which is about dharma, duty, the goals of life. And the ascetic or the renunciate is the yogi. That's one who renounces mainstream society in pursuit of spiritual goals of liberation. But interestingly, the householder and the student, they have different goals. Now, for most of us, we are householders and students. I mean, there might be some renunciate elements in our approach to life, perhaps, but we are not total renunciates. And so learning about this can give us that nuance to realize or to question the goals in the yogic texts, because we recognize that actually they're not really written for someone exactly like me or composed for someone like me. And while they may still have valuable jewels inside them, acknowledging this can make us a little bit more grounded, And that nuance can help us live in better ways, because we're not just taking these concepts and thinking that these need to be right for me because they're yoga philosophy and I'm a yogi. But actually, even in ancient times, there was nuance. And the yogic period or evolution is really good at nuance compared to modern life, which sometimes is just about one person must be right or one idea must be right, which we see in politics all the time. Okay, another one, which is a really biggie, is Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. That's the text that literally everyone has heard of. I mean, most people have heard of, not everyone. And it's very popular and we learn about it in the teacher training, but we often cherry pick some parts of it that kind of sound good and we disregard others. Now, interestingly, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is very anti the body. It has a huge disregard for the body and calls it disgusting. And that's not really aligned with modern life. We quite love our bodies. We're very body positive. So we can recognize that and like, oh, there's actually a distinction between that text, the values of that text and our values now. On the other hand, medieval Tantra yoga, which emerged in the medieval period, began to have new ideas about the body, which we might argue are more positive. So it saw the body as divine, and it saw the body not as something to be disregarded in the search for transcendence or enlightenment, but actually the body was part of the journey to enlightenment. And we also see this with non-dualism, that we can begin to, it's not, so in the early text, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, etc., there's a big division between purity and impurity. And it's dual, it's underpinned by a dualist metaphysics or philosophy. But with non-dualism, there begins to be actually realizing that perhaps anything can be, everything is divine and or everything is one, and anything can be a path to enlightenment or to the goals of yoga. So that's really interesting and perhaps can be something we can bring into our teaching, our life. There are different paths of yoga. I'm sure some of you already know this, including the path of knowledge, jnana marga, and loving devotion, the bhakti marga, as well as karma yoga, the path of action. Now, if we think about yogic concepts such as non-attachment, or at least having some detachment, not being fully attached to things, or having a mind or relationship of equanimity. These are some yogic ideas. Perhaps in our classes, we could introduce these to students through ideas of action in everyday life or questions. I think it's really great in yoga classes in this post-lineage context to not just, someone was saying earlier, it feels a bit dodgy or weird sometimes to push ideas on people, but rather open with questions, inviting curiosity and inquiry, asking your students questions and then saying, oh, maybe you could relate it to this, or introducing a historical philosophical concept idea that's interesting for the student, and they can see maybe relationships between them, but realize they are not necessarily the same thing. And finally, this is my favorite. The imagination was central to many yoga traditions, including medieval Tantra. So we often criticize the imagination in the West as fanciful, although visualization and affirmation is growing in popularity. Imagination was central to yoga over time, especially in the tantric period. And we begin to get the chakras emerge in the medieval tantric period, the nadis, the subtle body anatomy, all these amazing things, the goddesses, meditating all of these into our body. And there's a school of thought which argues that these are completely imagination-focused approaches to yoga. And actually, my own teaching practice is really inspired by this. So I was saying earlier that yoga philosophy is not just ideas or concepts, but it's a way of life. And it's also thinking about pedagogy, the way we teach, epistemology, which means our theory of knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we learn? What is the structure of knowing? And in the West, we can often think about it as just learning things in our minds. But actually, the medieval tantric period emphasizes how the imagination is a tool for embodied learning. And that can massively inspire our own teaching pedagogies today. So those are just a few things that are both interesting about the philosophy and history of yoga, but also can inspire our teaching, our practice, and our lives. And these are the kind of things we'll explore in my course as well on the history and philosophy of yoga. So thank you. We've come to the end. And I did say there's going to be an ebook. So there is going to be an ebook, but I decided that it was going to be too much information for one day. So you guys will get the ebook in a week or two when you've had some time to integrate. And for now, that's the end. We have time for some questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, and I'll stop sharing. So if you have any questions, you're welcome, or points for discussion. Oh, thank you. Points for discussion, if anything's interesting and you want to bring up, you're welcome to do so either in the chat or you can unmute yourself as well. So Dorleen said, that was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Dorleen. Don't think we have met before, but nice to have you here. Hannah says, not a question, but just want to say thank you for putting together such an amazing, such an informative presentation. Oh, thank you. Looking forward to hopefully joining the course also. That'd be great. Have to hop off at the studio build is happening today. Oh, great. Lots of love. See you soon, Hannah. Okay, so Nat asks, how could you integrate something like asking a question or bring up a philosophical topic in a class? Great. How could, like asking a question or bringing up a philosophical. So I think this can happen in different ways on a very physical kind of anatomy or asana focused way. You can ask questions such as how, like inquiry. So how does your spine feel, or what do you notice? And as teachers, we can sometimes overthink that and then think we need to say more. But really, as a student, there's so much value in a teacher asking a question and leaving silence. And then you're curious, oh, what does that feel like? Now, in a philosophical way, I think meditation is a great space for this. So asking a question, bring up a philosophical topic. So one thing I have done before is like, who are we? A meditation where we begin to ask, get the student to think about their life, think about their relationship with other people and who they identify as in the world, and then ask them, but are you really that? Is that who you are? So we begin to peel back the layers of attachment. You can also, so this is a one I like, is poetry. Pierre Hadot talks about the fact that it's often poetry which is actually more poetic than philosophy. Sorry, more philosophical than philosophy, because philosophy in this ancient and pre-modern way is really about that space. It's like so it's like language does half the work, as I've been saying, but actually, or the most important thing is silence. And language can lead us to a place of relaxation and contemplation. But then it's that silence, that rest, which allows for that next step. So sometimes introducing beautiful words which reflect a theme, and then leaving space for that to resonate in people's bodies and experiences can be really powerful as well, and beautiful because it connects us to something deeper, not just our mind, but our embodied experience. So those are just three little ideas there, and it's definitely something we'll discuss more in the course, and which is going to be really a place where people can also share and we can learn from each other as well. In a post-lineage age, I am not the only authority on philosophy and history of yoga. Okay. Any other questions I'd be welcome to have. Thank you, Bells. Thank you, Nat. My pleasure. And I will be doing another talk in June on a different topic. I haven't decided what yet, but there'll be another one. If anyone has any requests, you can let me know. Okay. Anyone else have anything they want to share? Any reflections? You're welcome to unmute.
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you in person because I'm super tired and my messages are coming out really short, like I don't mean it. So just wanted to say thank you. Yeah, and I'll look into your course as well because I think that's really, yeah, that's something I've been struggling with. So yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to have you, Natalia. Cool. And I hope you guys don't mind. I just want to take a little photo for the memes. But obviously you can if you don't want to be in it, please take off your camera now. Or if you do want to be on it, turn on your camera. Okay. Smile, everyone. Oops. Okay. Cool. Okay. Thank you so much, Bavi. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we're probably going to end a few 10 minutes early. Thank you, Eleni. But if anyone has any more questions, now's your chance, or reflections. I'll send some details around the course. If you're a yoga teacher, Yoga Teacher Community Club is a great space. It's normally in Cambridge, but I've now started doing it online every other month. It'll probably be more in the future. And it's like really affordable as well. It's like 5, 10, 15 pounds at the moment. Pay what you can, and it's very much about discussion and reflection. Okay, cool. So if there's no more questions, we'll end there.
I had question or something to share about something that was mentioned before about the separation between, like separation in the mat, and I was wondering if that's separation between other people, or what did you mean then?
I mean that a lot of people go to yoga in this kind of well-being context, and it's quite individualistic, and that is completely fine as well. I understand that a lot of people go to yoga and don't want to talk to anyone and just want to do their practice and then leave. But also it's not everywhere, but it's a lot of studios I've taught at and been to where it's very much a transient community is one thing. So people aren't going, every week at the same group committed. That's one aspect. But it's just people go and then they leave, and there's a sense that it's just something you do for yourself. And, both ancient yoga or traditional yoga, which is done in a community of seekers or with the teachers and disciples, and ancient philosophy, which is done in a community of seekers as well. These remind us that actually these practices are not really done alone, and that the modern capitalist hyper-individualistic world emphasizes the individual's pursuit at the absence of community sometimes. And I think that's really reflected in modern yoga. Not everywhere, but a lot of studios.
Mhm.
And perhaps that's partly because they just emphasize the physical practice as well. Like if there's space for discussion, groups, and like studying texts or studying yoga on a deeper level, like a teacher training, then there is probably more community. But we have just this transient approach to just going to individual classes. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's really nice when sometimes there can be a community or interaction of some kind in a class.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. Cool. Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy the sun, if it's sunny where you are. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can drop me a message on Instagram or email. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Annette. Thanks for coming. Bye, Eva. Great to have you. Bye, Nat.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, Natalia.
I'm waving. Bye.
Oh, bye. Okay, stop recording.